Hey everyone, you're listening to Module 15 in the Ultimate House Hacking Guide for Denver. So this is going to be our final episode in the Ultimate House Hacking Guide. And this is a episode and also a chapter in the book that we put in there kind of last minute, because while we were going through there and getting the book written and getting the audio recorded, I had a great opportunity come up where I could partner with Jenny Bayless, who's an investor and investor-friendly agent down in Colorado Springs. And just the way we work, the way we think, it's all in alignment. And so it just made great sense to partner up and work together. And that way she can kind of take on the Springs and share all the knowledge from the Springs. And so in the book, Jenny wrote a chapter on the Colorado Springs market, and now we're recording a podcast episode to talk about as well. Jenny, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me on today.
Of course. And, we won't go into a lot of high level details on the Springs because I don't know, probably a month or two before this podcast release, we did 5 episodes on the Springs, and we'll do more market updates in the future on there. But just from like a high level, give us a 2-3 minute rundown on the house hacking market in Colorado Springs.
So I really equate it very similar to Denver, just with a lower price point to enter. So as we've kind of discussed before, Colorado Springs has a really good and diverse economy. There's military, there's tech, tourism, all those contribute to a really healthy and strong economy. And I think that it'll continue to grow down there. It's consistently ranking high on best places to live. So that kind of, contributes to the whole house hacking strategy. And it's also consistently ranking high on the hottest housing market list. So I think considering that it has a good balance of live, work type scenarios, I think that it makes itself a really good house hacking opportunity location.
Yeah, and I think with one of the first sense you said it, that's exactly what I've been kind of learning as I've been talking with you. And, we've traded back and forth a lot of deal analyses that you've been running down there, a couple of properties under contract, and it's kind of, talking shop with you. That's just, very similar ratios and numbers, cash on cash return, cap rates to Denver, but just a lower price point, lower rents, lower taxes, lots of lower stuff. But give us an average, what's the property or what's the price range for a typical house hack property you're seeing?
I would say probably high 2s to low 3s would be kind of the sweet spot.
Yeah. So high 2s to low 3s. And we're often mid 3s to mid 4s up here in Denver. I don't know what our median or average is, but I'd say it's probably around the $4,000 mark here in Denver, just kind of doing some really rough math in my head.
Yeah. The median overall for Colorado Springs this summer was $360.
Okay. That's for the whole Springs market?
Yes.
Okay. Now, what about as you know, in Denver here, we have a pretty low supply of multifamily, and a lot of our house hackers are buying detached single family homes. What's it like in the Springs?
I would say it's very similar. I think that you're probably going to get your best bang for your buck by doing that same strategy in the Springs.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, walk us through, because I know in the chapter on the book, you broke down different geographic locations in the Springs. Can you run me and the listeners through those locations and kind of the opportunities you see in there as well?
Definitely. So I see Colorado Springs as having really 3 kind of set geographic sub areas for house hacking. So the first one being central, southeast, maybe over to the airport. That's where you're going to find some of your older homes, 50s, 60s, 70s in there. And what I've noticed in that region is that it's probably going to be your best price to rent ratio, especially if you're going to utilize the room by room strategy. And then additionally, I think there's room to build equity in that location also, because there's a lot of poorly utilized space. In these older homes, you might find rec rooms or bonus rooms that I think that if you're able to keep the same footprint of the property, but be able to build a bedroom, possibly even a bathroom extra, that will go a long way while you're house hacking. So you could, turn that rec room into a bedroom, bathroom, and be able to command more rent while you're living there as a house hacker. If you do the room by room strategy. If you decide not to do the rent by the room strategy after you move out and convert it into just a single rental, you can ask for more in rent because you now have a higher bedroom and bathroom count. So that's kind of what I would recommend for that area.
And in these parts, in this part of town, you mentioned it was kind of like the layouts of, I know here in Denver, we like different pockets of Denver just because the builders back in the 60s built it a really good way for exactly what you said. So for these conversions, are they fairly like, simple, lower cost conversions? Is it like, hey, add an egress window or add some drywall? Like, for typical things, like what's the extent to adding a bedroom or bathroom in terms of like work, and how serious of a project is it?
So we actually ended up doing this, not for a house hack, but for one of our rental properties that we own. We bought the house. It was a 3-bed, 1.5 bath. We bought it for $165,000, which of course this is a couple of years ago. And then we saw that in the basement area is a tri-level. There's a rec room, and then the powder room was also right next to the utility closet. So it had really easy access to the water line and everything. So we were able to convert the rec room into a bedroom, and it actually already had a legal egress window in there. And then for the bathroom, we were able to add a stand-up shower, like a 3/4 bath. So now it's a 4-2.
And so that sounds like, probably didn't cost you too much money to do that, right?
It did not, no. Okay. Just really adding a wall and then a shower.
Okay, so a few grand if you're on the high side, maybe?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Great. Now, what about some other parts of town?
So if we're going to then move to probably the west side of town / downtown Memorial Park, that would be the next segment that I would kind of branch off. And I think that this part of town is probably best for what you consider a traditional house hack, a multifamily, and that's mostly due to the zoning of this area. So you're more likely to find R2, R4 zoned land and property down there.
So just like detached homes on R2 or R4 lot?
Mm-hmm.
Have they started, like, you've probably been to like the Highlands and parts of Denver where there's a lot of like the 6250 lots, there are R2s, and people scrape and build up duplexes. Is any of that going on down there yet?
I haven't seen too much of that. I'm kind of waiting for that, or slot homes or something like that to start popping up, but I haven't seen it.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about, in your notes, I don't know if it's this part of town, you'd mentioned Airbnb for one of the parts of town.
Yeah, so I think that this part of town would probably lend itself best for an Airbnb house hack. And of course, I'd want to caveat with the fact that Colorado Springs has really started restricting its Airbnb regulations. So it's constantly changing, and I would say it's constantly changing to be more restrictive. So my general rule of thumb that I tell everyone is underwrite the property as a long-term rental, utilizing it in that capacity. And then while you're living in it, if you are able to Airbnb house hack, the other unit or a room or however you want to do it, go ahead and take advantage of that opportunity while you can, but always underwrite the property as a long-term rental, because we don't know when, the legislation will become even more restrictive at that point.
Yeah, and I think so, especially like that's how often, we underwrite properties up here is, hey, if you want to Airbnb, because a lot of times I just don't think the extra work is worth all the extra couple of dollars a month. That's a lot of my clients think as well. So, but some will do, but when they move out, they plan on doing a long-term rental. Is that kind of what you're suggesting in the Springs as well?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think it was we're recording this in August of 2020. It was like back in like December of 19 or January 2020 is when those rules changed in the Springs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. And definitely, like, I know we won't get into the nitty gritty on there because, as Jenny said, they got, they're detailed and they're evolving, but make sure you understand it, and definitely, do your research on Google and read up on them. Because I remember reading them and they sounded, Springs went from like, hey, the Airbnb haven to now, oh, if you're not grandfathered in, it's pretty darn restrictive now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Now, what about like the other parts of town?
So the third area that I would probably segment off is Northern Colorado Springs. And if you kind of drive down the Powers Corridor, you're going to see a ton of new homes popping up, newer homes that are already there. It's just kind of the new part that the city is getting built up. And I think it's very close to Peterson Air Force Base, a lot of the tech companies, a lot of the government contractors. And then on top of that, you're actually seeing a lot of Denver commuters. So there's a lot of people that live in Colorado Springs, whether it be for, the outdoor activities, the cost of living, and then they commute up to Denver. So it's kind of a good pathway up there. So what I would recommend for that area is also the rent by the room strategy would work. It's not going to be as good of a return as if you move down to the central southeastern location that we were just discussing, but it would be very good to offset your living expenses if you rented by the room. And then on top of that, since the homes are much newer, you're probably going to have lower maintenance, lower CapEx at first. So that's just something to consider. And then on top of that, the homes are typically bigger. So if you wanted to utilize that multi-generational house hack, you would probably have the opportunity to do it in this region because you're going to have a big basement area that you could convert into, a separate living quarters.
Great. Now, I know in the book, and we'll run through these numbers. You did a deal analysis, since we did quite a few deal analyses on the podcast and the book. You did one for the Springs as well. So I'm going to share my screen. And then if you guys listen to the podcast, these are in the show notes or, on the blog post, click the show notes. They're in the book as well. Or if you, can't find it, then just email me or Jenny will get it to you. But can you see my screen, Jenny?
I can.
All right. So I am scrolling down here. Again, we try to keep things simple. We're using Joe's spreadsheet again. Kind of keep things consistent. So I've got it up here on my screen, Jenny. So kind of walk us through this right now.
Yeah. So this is an example of something that I just found on the MLS back in Q3. So a couple months ago when we were writing this chapter. And the property already had a kitchenette and a second entrance. So I thought that this would be a really good example for a house hack because we could convert it into a second living space. And then on top of that, it was zoned appropriately to do that. It was zoned at R4. So having a two-family setup would be legal for that. So what I went ahead and did was budgeted $10,000 to properly convert the home from a 3-bed, 2-bath to one unit that was a 2-bed, 1-bath, and one unit that was a 1-bed, 1-bath.
Okay. And so $10,000 is pretty cheap for that conversion. Mm-hmm. And so I'm assuming this is a detached single family?
That's correct.
And what part of town is this? Central, west side, or northern?
Downtown. Mm-hmm.
Downtown. Okay.
Yep.
Perfect. And so you've underwritten here, you have 2 units of the spreadsheet, 5% down payment, $315 purchase price, standard, $5,000 ballpark for acquisition costs, $1,500 and change for loan costs. So, and then with the repair cost, all in for $32,300, which is,
it's pretty good.
Pretty good. So without those repair costs, you're in the low 20s. With the repair costs, you're in for $32,000, which is great.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time you underwrote it, it was interest rates at 3%. Now they've even dropped more since then, but we'll keep it at 3%. So you're ballparking $1,100 in rent for the bigger unit and $900 for the lower unit.
Yeah, so this analysis is taking into account once the house hacker is nomaded out of the property.
Okay.
So if we were to just quickly run through while they're living in the property, even if they wanted to live in that 2-bedroom unit and just rent out the 1-bedroom unit for the $900 a month, if we considered all of their costs, we're looking at about $600 out of pocket to live in this property. And then if they wanted to rent out that second bedroom, probably about $500 a month. So now we're looking at about $100 a month in living expenses to live in this property while they're house hacking it.
Yeah. So, I mean, that is definitely reducing living expenses.
Yes, I would say so.
Yeah.
So then when they move out, assuming that they rent the 2-bedroom unit as a whole, that's sort of what this analysis is looking at. So we also took the assumption that they're going to self-manage it just because, house hacking, they probably want to be able to optimize their expenses in that regard. So yeah, if we look down the rest of the analysis, property taxes are pretty low, 1,100. We just assumed $1,500 for insurance because now it's a duplex. And honestly, if we look at the rent rates, I think that those prices are really conservative. I think that you could probably get $100 to $150 more a month per unit. But we just wanted to take the middle of the road amount in that regard.
I like that. You got 8% for reserves and $500 a year for landscaping.
Mm-hmm.
In addition to that, and then kind of going to the, we're looking at screenshots right now, but this is the cash flow tab of the spreadsheet here. Walk us through these numbers.
Yeah,
if you don't
absolutely.
mind.
So just one other thing to mention is that we were conservative with our increases in terms of annual rent and appreciation. Historically, Colorado Springs has seen 7% appreciation for the value of the home, 4% rent increase. So we underwrote 3% and 5% for those. So I think this is really conservative. But so if we take the net operating income, we're at about $18,000 minus your mortgage payments, your mortgage insurance, because remember, we're only putting 5% down.
And you put in the spreadsheet to pay it monthly, not upfront.
That's correct. And so now we're looking at almost $2,000 annual cash flow before taxes, which would give you a 5.7% cash on cash, a 5.6% cap rate. And if we're looking at the first year return on investment, that's what considers the appreciation, cash flow, depreciation, debt pay down. We're at over 80% return on our original 5% down.
And I think for the appreciation, I think you assumed you said a 5% annual appreciation, right?
That's correct.
Okay. So I want to kind of talk about these numbers with you here and just kind of think out loud with you as well, because it's always, good to point out that, even if you factored in property management, you would still be at a positive cash flowing property by a few $100s a year, just doing some quick math. Include it, you're probably down like a high 4 or 5 cap rate, a high 4 to 5-ish cap rate then, which we said a lot of times what we're seeing right around Denver, those high 4s to low 5 cap rates with property management. And it's all very similar returns, just, it's a lower price point. And of course, we can always manipulate the PMI number. You can prepay it. And of course, the spreadsheet here is estimating $107 a month. As we all know, probably by now, since I'm a broken record on this, you'll know those final numbers once you get under contract, and the lender will kind of tell you, hey, here's the estimated cost for all that, so you'll know it. But oftentimes, what we're seeing in Denver and probably the Springs, Jenny, is a lot of times people's actual MI is coming in lower than estimated on the spreadsheet.
Right.
Which is always a pleasant surprise.
Yeah, that's the way I like to look at things.
Yeah, but that's that's one of the reasons we hit it off well, is because we run numbers on the conservative side, and always hopefully are pleasantly surprised a year or two later.
Exactly.
So this is great. So all in, a good property. You can live there for practically free if you rent out one unit, rent out the other bedroom. You're at $100 a month in living expenses, which is, dirt cheap. I doubt rooms are that cheap in the Springs to rent for $100 a month. I know in Denver they're not, so I assume the Springs is the same way. Great market of house hacking. You can still go out there and find properties that, you find a good property, you can put very little down and still have, a cash flow property once you move out, which is phenomenal. So one thing as we wrap up here, I'll mention, because we mentioned this on some of the previous podcasts we're doing, is that you are running I think you're sending out 3 emails a week to just kind of do different deals in Colorado Springs. Now, they're not all house hacking. Some are house hacks, some are investments, condos, single family homes, duplexes, but you're doing that, I think, every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, right?
That's correct.
Yeah. And so we've gotten really good feedback on there. If you guys are interested in kind of just seeing what the numbers are like down there, email me or email Jenny, or just go to the website and you'll see Springs in the top navigation bar. And then if you drop down, you'll see something that says email list or deals list or something. If you click on there, you can join it. Again, if you get confused, just email me or Jenny. And I'm kind of going through my agenda here, Jenny. I hit all my topics and questions for you. Anything you want to throw in there before we wrap up?
No, I think this is a pretty, comprehensive, quick overview of the Colorado Springs house hacking market.
Yeah.
And I think it's a great opportunity. I really do.
Yeah, awesome. Well, Jenny, I appreciate it. Again, if you guys want to see some, live deal flow, join that email list. And if you got any questions on the Springs market, feel free to reach out to Jenny. Her email will be in the blog post on the website. Or I know how sometimes it's hard to find stuff on websites. Always email me, Chris at Denver Investment Real Estate, and I'll connect you guys. Jenny is a wealth of knowledge down there. She owns quite a few rental properties herself, so she has her finger on the pulse. All right, Jenny. Well, thank you for listening, or not thank you for listening, but thank you for joining us. And the listeners out there, thank you for listening to this. And this will officially wrap up our entire, I think we're up to like a 15-part series now on the house hacking guide. So we'll definitely have more episodes in the future on house hacking, deal analyses, more topics, but this kind of ends this, blitz on house hacking we're doing. So I appreciate you guys listening. Feedback, questions, reach out to me, reach out to Jenny. You need a copy of the book. It's on Amazon, or reach out to us. We can get you a copy. All right. Thanks, Jenny, and thanks, everyone.
Thank you.